I'm Ruth.
I'm Ray. We go together like Beyonce and Jay.
No, Ray, we're
I don't know
nothing
what's
like
wrong
them.
with that. Tell me what's wrong with that.
We're nothing like
But
them.
they're ride or die like us, right?
You
That's
know what?
all.
I'm not that ride or die. I am
Fine.
not.
She's a Latina.
He's a gringo. I'm into culture and food
And I'm zero.
Why would you say that?
I'm
do not
always
want
saying I'm
zero
into
on
boring
our
documentary
podcast.
stuff.
Oh my
And like
God.
you're into like cool stuff. Why do people want to listen to this? It's because we're different.
We go together like how and why?
But somehow it just works.
What are you guys doing?
Go back to bed, Pablo. We're just recording our podcast.
Everybody has a podcast.
Everybody has a podcast.
With Ruth
And Ray.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Everybody Has a Podcast with Ruth and Ray.
Hey.
I definitely want to get into our special guest of today.
Okay. Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about our special guest?
So our friend Collier Landry is essentially a very unique true crime specialist and media personality.
And why is he a specialist, Ray?
Well, he's a specialist because sadly he lived this himself in one of the more horrific and weirder ways, which is that his prominent doctor father murdered his mother. And he had to give the testimony in his small city of Mansfield, Ohio in 1990 that put his father away. Mm-hmm. So he lived with that baggage for many decades. And we did a movie. I got to meet him in 2016 while we were making together the Barbara Kopple directed film A Murder in Mansfield, which came out on Investigation Discovery in 2017.
It's still available on ID. So if you have a subscription to Max, formerly known as HBO, it's now Max is an umbrella name for HBO, ID channel, the Home and Garden TV channel, and some other and Discovery, right? Or Discovery, yeah.
It's all the Time Warner properties,
right?
if you happen to know all of those. But
CNN.
But yeah, I guess it's on Max. I thought it was also, if not Amazon Prime. Anyway, yeah, it's out there. A Murder in Mansfield. But I call A Murder in Mansfield a true crime self-help mashup. Because Collier basically had this novel idea, which was when you're really close to violent crime, you often don't try to confront or process the trauma and the issues that it's caused you on a psychological level, because you want to kind of just avoid that really gross thing that happened in your life, right?
Well, I mean, it must be so emotionally exhausting, right? To have to sit there and think about the one time your dad murdered your mom.
Exactly.
While you were in the house with them.
Right.
Like, that's crazy.
Right. And but Collier sat on this for decades, and believe he was in his 30s, mid-30s when I met him in 2016. He came back to Mansfield, Ohio, and he decided that instead of avoiding these issues, he was going to meet with his childhood psychiatrist to talk about it, Dr. Marikas. He was going to meet with the lead investigator, finally look at the photos and see what was actually done. And he was going to go into that prison unbeknownst to his dad thinking that he was coming in to try to make a documentary to try to get him freed, and he was going to try to get his father for the first time to confess to the thing that he had been serving 20 plus years in jail for.
And as a spoiler alert, I guess I should say, what's really interesting about this confrontation is that Collier had confronted his father about admitting to the crime in a letter,
right,
which his father basically rejected, right? What was that? There's a specific phrase for it. Basically, it was just
return to what was that?
Right?
Return to sender.
It was something that just
non-deliverable.
It's just something that it literally just sounded like rejection. It was literally no. I don't even. It was really interesting because the way I understand it inside in the documentary, it's that his dad didn't even open the envelope. Something about his dad knew what the letter was about. And so he was just nope, it's rejected. I don't want to read it. I don't send it back to sender. Yeah. And so he never got that peace of mind of just hearing his dad admit to the crime, even though we all know that Collier knows that his father committed the crime. but there is something to say about getting closure from the person who committed the crime.
And that's what made the scene in the prison, which plays out in near real time at the end of that film. It's like a 15-minute scene, but like we were on the edge of our seats because of the fact that we knew how much it would mean to Collier if he could get that piece of closure, to hear it from his dad that, yes, I did this and here's why. So the stakes were so high, and to watch his dad try to deflect and try to get out of it and Collier really go for it.
You know what I think is weird? I think it's really weird, and obviously it proves that his dad is unfortunately are those called psychopaths or sociopaths?
I've heard him referred to as sociopath only. I haven't heard psychopath.
Okay, right. That makes sense. So I guess you know that you're dealing with a sociopath when he has been serving already, like 20 years in prison or something, right? By the time you guys made the documentary. And he still thinks that not admitting to the crime to his son would somehow like delete or reduce his life sentence. I just think that's so interesting and weird. It's like, on what planet did you even find the sliver of hope to get out of jail?
And this doesn't get mentioned during our interview with Collier. I had meant to bring it up, but I happen to know that I believe Dr. Boyle is up for, former Dr. Boyle is up for parole next year, and a little birdie tells me he's got a decent shot of actually getting out next year.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
That's the word on the street.
We'll have to do a follow-up on that if that actually happens. That's wild. I mean, it's so obvious that he did it. Like, it was, but the evidence was...
Yeah, but parole is not based on guilt or lack of guilt.
I get it, but I mean, he's a sociopath. So he's not a safe person to have in society.
Yeah.
He's like a danger to society.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you can actually fix a sociopath. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that's, like, fixable in any prison reform program. I don't know. It's just, well, okay. That's scary. I look forward to people listening to this interview. I thought it was a really interesting interview. We talked about a little bit of everything. I really liked hearing Collier's journey into making the film. I thought it was interesting that he had wanted to tell his story for like 10 years before it was even made. And it sounds right. That's usually how Hollywood works, right? Like, you have an idea and then, like, hopefully in a decade it gets made.
Yeah, and he's just that kind of guy. Like, so when we were making the movie, you mentioned the box of letters. Like, Collier handed those over, and it was my job to know those inside and out and kind of point Barbara towards things I thought were interesting and useful. I also went through I think it might have been 13 hours of courtroom testimony that we were able to get the video for, and
wow.
So I got to see all of young Collier's testimony. What was he, 11? And he really is like a kid star on the stand. I can understand why everyone in that area of Ohio, like how he basically became a child celebrity at that point.
Right. Yeah.
Because he's like funny and he's cute and he's smart and you can tell he's got some thoughts, some shade he's throwing to dad and so on and so forth. And
he was just so aware at a young age, and he is so smart.
Yeah.
And
he always had those eyes.
He's
still
always
got those
had
trademark...
those eyes. He's a very good looking person.
Yep.
His mother, from what we heard and know of her, was a very elegant woman, a very beautiful woman.
Yep.
His father is also good looking. He just happens to have flaws, let's call them. But yeah, I mean, Collier is a really interesting person. He's a good person, which is really nice, right? Because sometimes this stuff, as he mentions in the documentary, every so often, I'm sure there's a person that's like, ooh, how much like your father are you? Right. And what qualities are those? Right. So it is nice to know that sociopaths can have totally normal, healthy children.
And so Collier, we didn't get as much into this in the interview, but after A Murder in Mansfield, he basically decided that he was going to go kind of all in on true crime, and that maybe he could use what happened to him as a way to help other people navigate this. And so at first that show was called Moving Past Murder, and more recently it's become the Collier Landry Show.
And it's on YouTube.
Yep.
And I really like that he has a YouTube channel now or show because he's such a dynamic person and he's so easy to listen to and also to watch. So I think, as we say in the Piz, I think he's got it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he describes to us something kind of exciting that has not been announced yet that he's going to be doing around his own case again in the near future. So if you listen to this episode, you'll find out some advanced preview?
Yeah. So we hope that you enjoy the interview when you get to it. Okay, let's move on. I don't want to get too crimey specific, but I do have to just point this out because we are on the topic. I probably shouldn't be talking about true crime around the holidays, huh? People probably aren't really into that. But
yeah, it's a weird time to release this episode, actually.
Yeah, totally. But just for funsies, I just want to point out that Ray's favorite true crime story, and I say that not in like, oh, he has so much fun hearing about people's deaths, but the true crime story that he's most into is the Zodiac Killer. And they continue to make Zodiac documentaries and movies like every single year, it seems like. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know what, the first thing that got me into Zodiac was just that I like all David Fincher films. Like they're amazing, and Zodiac is possibly my favorite of all of his, which is really saying something.
So did that film introduce you to the Zodiac case?
It really did.
Oh, okay.
I saw the movie. Mm-hmm. Then I was like, all right, I'll go ahead and read the book that he adapted. Why not? It's a bestseller. I'll check it out. And then I was on a long road trip, and I decided to our friends at Tenderfoot TV had put out a Zodiac, and I was like, they always do really good stuff. Let me see what they do with this 12-part Zodiac thing. By the way, I still hope they fund our stuff. So sorry, Tenderfoot, but it started out being the type of thing you want from podcasts, which is like, okay, if we're gonna do 12 episodes, I'm gonna know every detail about how this case twisted and turned, right? And it does that for 7 episodes or 8, and then they just start tacking crap on.
Oh.
It just starts being like, oh, you thought we were going to take you to some kind of a solution on this? No, now it just becomes like everything in the kitchen sink from here. So what are you listening to?
I'm listening mostly to pop culture podcasts because I like escapism in my entertainment. So I've been listening to a lot of Las Culturistas, which I really like. And
what is that?
It hurts me that you don't know what that is, by the way. It does hurt me a little bit how detached you are from pop culture. I cannot understand it or explain it for you. How about that?
So everyone, just so you understand what just happened there, that was me trying to do my job by asking, what is that, for the audience, so that she could go on and explain it, and then I got
it's a podcast,
taken to task.
It's a podcast co-hosted by two very funny men. One of them is named Matt Rogers, and the other one is named Bowen Yang. You may know Bowen Yang from SNL,
sure,
and from the now released movie Wicked, and a bunch of other things. And Matt Rogers is hilarious as well, and he's a writer, and oh man, they're so funny, and I just absolutely love listening to them. It's a joyride. And then I have some other fun stuff because I love my Bravo housewife stuff, which I totally get why people are disgusted by it, but I am who I am. So yeah, I like escapism in my entertainment. I do have this side of me that does history and likes to learn and likes academia. So I don't know if you remember, but earlier this year, I was very much into the saga of Henry VIII and all of his wives, and I went into a deep rabbit hole in that. I've always wanted to get into it, but I never found the right time, and that time happened to be earlier this year. Recently, we watched Napoleon.
Yeah.
And I just really like watching a good movie or documentary about historical figures. So I'm going into a minor rabbit hole of Napoleon. I mean, I've known a little bit about Napoleon and Josephine and all that, but I don't know, I'm just going
they hooked you with the Josephine.
Yeah, they did hook me with the Josephine a long time ago.
You're not looking deeply into his military tactics.
I am not. This started a long time ago for me, probably 15 or 20 years ago, to be completely honest, because I was reading a lot of poetry then. And so I found some poems of Napoleon. I was like, wow, like they're really beautiful and intense. And it just said a lot about his personality to me. And it showed me how, like, men are so interesting. I mean, there used to be a time where men could go and sacrifice 40,000 of their own people, but also write the most beautiful romantic letters to their wives or lovers.
I told you I'm deeply conflicted about. I'm not deeply conflicted. I'm pretty sure I don't like Napoleon.
Oh yeah, I mean a lot of the people that I'm interested in, I'm not interested in them because I think they're good people. I mean, I don't think you're interested in the Zodiac Killer because he's a blast. I'm not interested in the house.
Well, we don't know who the real guy was, so.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm sure he was precious.
I don't know.
So anyway, that leads me to talking about how we watched Napoleon with Joaquin Phoenix, which I thought was a weird choice because he's not French or Italian or European. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, he bothered me a little bit.
Yeah, he did bother you. You say he's a mumbler.
Yeah, well, pay attention next time you see Joaquin doing a set of lines and you realize he's got this kind of set way of talking where he sort of mumbles out what he's saying. You don't mind because he looks good and he like delivers it how he's supposed. But like I realize like Napoleon didn't talk like that.
How do you know?
Nobody ever reported Napoleon was like...
Ridley Scott thought that was it. That was the voice.
So it bothered me because it was just Joaquin not trying at all to be anybody but Joaquin. He's just like, what if Joaquin Phoenix was Napoleon? I feel like that's what he pitched.
If anything, I thought
all right.
So what I'm okay, so I guess we're going into another tangent, and I do want to eventually lead this into the fact that now is like the season to watch movies because it's right before award season.
Yeah.
And this is when all of the good movies come out. But basically what I noticed, very similar to the Oppenheimer of it all, is that when men make movies about controversial figures like Napoleon, right? Like he's got the beautiful poetry, but he's also killing like 3 million people. It's interesting how men choose to portray these figures. Like the movie made Napoleon very likable. Like I found him charming. He was funny at some points. Like there were not any scenes where I was terrified of this man. And so it makes me wonder, did everybody just really like him and he was good at his job, or were there moments when he was very scary, but they just decided not to go that way in the film?
I just have a hard time liking kings or king wannabes.
Which I like about you, right? Because that's why you're like classic American in that way.
Well, I was classic American.
Oh, yeah, like classic Republicans, classic
like
American.
Not modern American,
No,
the classic American.
Not Make America Great American, just what was before that.
At some point, so since the election, I've posted one thing on any social media, and it's just the words "I'm not talking about it yet" on Facebook. And I think I told you yesterday, I think I'm just going to get off all of social for a whole bunch of reasons, partially my own mental health and I just want to devote myself to real life and the real world.
Do you not do that already?
I don't like social media in a way that I don't think you'll ever understand. I think it's really obvious at this point that it's done severe damage to our society and our mental health, and I just think I don't have to do it.
You know, Ray, that's what people said about radio, television, film, music, rock and roll, abstract art. I disagree with you.
People were I think television ate the baby boomers' brains, so I think they might have been a little bit right about TV. But anyway, no, there wasn't like mass rise in suicides and just stupidity.
But social media is what you make of
it.
No, but no one's pushing certain social media on you. Like you get whatever you're interested in. You don't have to.
No.
You don't have to partake in the stuff that you don't like. That is a choice.
That sounds like an addict talking about how no, look, when I drink this bottle of Jack, I become a really good writer, and people really like what's coming out of my mouth.
That's not the same.
Entertaining guy.
That is not the same of what you're talking about.
It's not the same, but I'm
you
hearing...
choose what you scroll through on your phone.
I just think this is a bigger topic than we're going to be able to handle here. Maybe we talk about it more in future episodes. But I do think that there's now been a lot of both anecdotal and direct data about the damage being caused by this, and it's not all in our control. You don't just get what you want out of it. It grabs you and it pulls you back in.
Ray,
it takes your time. It takes you to a dark and hateful place,
that
an angry
that
place
is
over
true.
and over again.
That is true for a lot of people, unfortunately, right? You're
Like
always going to have
every person on Twitter who isn't just following Martha Stewart.
First of
I don't know.
all, who the fuck is on Twitter anymore?
First,
I've already talked about this.
Well,
I gave up X
this is
Twitter
what-
several years ago.
I
I
know,
was like,
but-
this is a trash fire here. So see, I chose to remove myself from a negative
you
environment.
chose to remove yourself from an echo chamber that didn't echo with your echoes.
No, it just, even if it was echoing with my echoes, I just didn't want to be part of that. That was not a fun party for me. Like, I want to have a good time, or I want to learn things. Like, there are so many things on social media that I have learned from, and I have become a more interesting or better person because of it. There's also stuff, sure, that I've been like, oh, like, you know, a little FOMO or envious of someone else, but it's my choice. Like, I can also just not let it affect, like, it doesn't affect you, right? Like, someone showing off something on social media just does not make you feel bad about yourself, and that's good. Like, you're mature enough and you know who you are, so like that stuff isn't actually going to affect you. Now, if you were like a 13-year-old boy who was like, I don't know, I feel like social media is bad for me and it's a bad influence, I'd be like, okay, Ray, like, good for you. But like, as an adult man, I'm like, really, you can't handle social media? To me, it almost seems like you're weak.
I think there's a lot of our audience that are going to agree with you, and I think there may be a few that are already agreeing with me or are intrigued. So let me just briefly say what the thinking process was, because I saw the flurry of people getting off quote-unquote X.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is a good excuse. Honestly, it hasn't been working for me there for a while, and like I've been wanting to do less social media, so maybe I'll just leave that. And then the very next thought I had, which is insanity, is, well, everyone's going over to Blue Sky. Maybe I'll just set up something there and like start over.
Oh, you went to Blue Sky?
No, hold on. And then I came to my senses and I thought, it's not really a totally different platform.
It's the same thing.
The same shit.
It's the same thing.
Just with like my lefty people, right?
It's the Pepsi.
And so I'm like, what am I doing? And then I told you that with Facebook, the longer I go without posting a single thought about the election or where we're headed, it's very uncharacteristic for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like the more time that goes on, the more I think like, all right, am I finally ready to give everyone my thoughts? And then I realize, what kind of a douche are you, dude? Nobody cares about your thoughts. You could never post about this and it would be fine. And then I realized I could never post about anything ever again, and it would also be fine. And maybe I would feel a lot better in a year.
By the way, everything that you just said makes total sense.
Right.
The difference between you and me, whichever one of those versions is the correct way of saying it, is that I really enjoy being seen and heard by others.
Yeah.
I like it and I appreciate it. And I also like hearing and seeing others. I don't think you have that innate need like I do.
Right.
So I think because that doesn't bring anything to you, you're just like, you know, you're a hater on social media, which I totally get. And by the way, we won't miss you because you're no fun.
I know.
Whereas I feel like I have such a good time.
And I've gotten
on
that
social
message
media.
loud and clear,
And
which
by
has
the
not been
way-
great for my psyche.
By the way, I share a ton of political stuff
Yeah.
on my social media, and I'm fine. Like, I have a healthy social media relationship. I just think there's a specific platform for you, and it's just called writing. Like, I think you should have your own.
Doomsayer.
No, ew, that's so unattractive to me. But you know what is attractive to me? A man who doesn't need social media, because you don't need outside validation, which I think is hot. Like, I think that's super awesome. I don't have that. I need validation from others and myself. Like, that's just who I am.
I still want outside validation. I want
Do
it for.
you?
I want it for.
But you only want it from very specific.
I want it for
elite
the work.
people.
No, that's not true. I want it for the work that I do. I don't want it for my personality and how good I am at begging people to like me. Anyway, the strong silent type. There is something to be said about the strong silent type, and that doesn't mean silent while ticking away with your thumbs on your phone.
You know, speaking of love and gratitude, I would like to close this out on a more positive note.
Oh, okay.
Okay, being that you're, who's the yin and who's the yang? We got to figure that out at some point.
Are you the yin?
I don't know. I can't remember how yin and yang works, but I know that I'm one of them and you're with the other one. But being that you don't have the need to be seen or validated or talk that much or smile in a picture, why would you choose to be with someone like me? Why are we here 7 years later after getting married? And by the way, you reminded me 7 years before that, so like basically 15 years together.
Yeah, 15 years straight of hanging out nonstop.
Yeah. How is this appealing? Like, I'm basically a walking version of stuff that you hate.
No, I don't.
I feel sometimes.
I hear you. I don't hate that other people want to put themselves out there and connect with other people and that they get things out of that. I understand that. I just think that it's been unhealthy for me, and I think it's actually it's turning the whole culture far more narcissistic, far more.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Unabashedly, unashamedly narcissistic, which I think is way worse than hidden narcissism. Now we're all just proud of it. So I actually think that if you, Ruth Vaca, could be satisfied with yourself without having to hear that from others,
From
you would
outside
be
validation.
a more centered and healthier person. That doesn't mean I hate who you are. That means I wish you to be well and wish you better and wish you healthiness.
Do you think I'm not centered?
I don't think you're centered. No.
You don't think I'm centered?
I don't think you're a centered person. You're often very wise. You can often
Yes.
see the reality or almost see the future in a way that my eyes that only want to see good and hope and whatever can't see until it's too late. But but I don't know that you're centered. Do you think I'm centered?
Yes. I mean, I think for the most part you're centered. I just think you're also, a very specific person and you have your own eccentricities like I do.
Yeah.
I just think it's really funny because we're just so painfully opposite in so many ways. And so sometimes I just try to have an objective view on our relationship,
Yeah.
and I'm just I know that most people on social media that you hate are probably how are those two together for 15 years? Make it make sense.
Well, what do
Make
you
it
think?
make sense.
Well, what do you think?
I think that we balance each other out very well.
Yeah.
And I think that people actually don't realize how much fun you actually are and how funny you are. And I think people don't realize how, dare I say, smart I actually am or thoughtful or introspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's not always fun, right?
And because I know how much depth there is to you, and also how good you can be to people, and how much you care about looking out for other people and elements of society, I think that's where when you are having fun with being shallow, I'm that's not you. That should, or you know what I mean, or you're better than that. You know what I mean?
That's how I feel when you're just I'm deleting all social media and you guys all suck. It's dude, relax. Why don't you get yourself a little Substack and write your little feelings out?
I don't know that everybody sucks.
Relax.
Maybe I suck, but one way or another, I do not. I've learned over life, and especially the last 8 years, and especially the last month, that I do not seem to be in lockstep with the majority of people. And it doesn't feel like I want to try anymore. I'd rather just make my art and just hope some distributor helps it find an audience than to me having to go begging out in the social media gutters to get people to like me first so that they'll look at my art.
Well, I wish you luck.
Thank you.
Do you wish me luck?
No. Yeah. I wish you the greatest of luck making all the friends, getting all the likes and the hearts and whatever else we do.
That's actually not really my thing if you think about it. I don't really have more than 800 followers on social media. If you really think about it, the weird thing about me is that it truly just satisfies me to be able to express myself.
Yeah.
In a very basic way, whether it's rerouting a clip of something educational or a food thing or a pop culture thing or a cute picture of me or whatever it is. I know this is hard for you to understand, but it just brings me joy to share. A lot of people think that people go into the entertainment business to be famous. And the older I got, the more I realized that it was never about being famous for me. It was about experiencing things with others.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really like connecting with others.
Yeah.
Like, I love it. I'm obsessed with it. It's why I like to talk to people, interview people, have this podcast, share on social media. I genuinely thrive on connecting with other people. On a side note, and I think this is what our upcoming episode should be, I really want to like do a quick review of the upcoming movies. I feel like we never talk about movies anymore.
Yeah. Well, by the way, I saw they just dropped the list of all the movies that were in contention for like the Academy Award for documentary, like that could possibly end up on the short list.
Yeah, so see, that's what I'm talking about. We got to catch up on that.
Massive list, and I was scrolling it, and then I like kind of skipped ahead.
Really?
And I got to the end of the list, and I thought to myself, that many documentaries got released last year?
And how many have we watched?
I hadn't watched most.
Oh, we got to catch up on our docs.
I really liked Alex Gibney's Sopranos documentary.
Oh, yeah, that was really good.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that.
And I really like this one called Wyatt Earp and the Cowboy War.
Yes, that's right. You did watch that.
A ton of high-end
Yes.
actors doing recreations, Ed Harris narrating, and it's basically the hook is like everybody thinks they know the story of Wyatt Earp and they've heard it a million times and it wasn't even that interesting the first time, but actually it's like the definitive like Western story. It's so cool.
Ray watched that by himself, and then I just had him retell it to me. It was like a Cliff's Note. I was like, okay, Ray, so tell me about Wyatt Earp.
Ruth,
and by the way,
have you ever
so interesting.
Seen one Western that you've liked? Is there one Western that you would watch again?
You know what's funny? So I took a cinema class in middle school. It was so cool. It was like a random class I was offered, and I was like, yes. And it was like a cinema class of classic films. And the first movie we watched was High Noon. I watched it. I think I was the only kid who didn't fall asleep in the middle of it. Like me and this other film nerd, I think we're the only ones who were actually paying attention to the movie. And I thought to myself, that's a good movie, but not my thing. And then I think it was maybe like a year or two later. I don't know if you remember, there were like a string of Western movies. Don't you remember in the 90s there were like a ton of Western movies?
Yeah, so Rides with Horses.
Dances with Wolves.
Dances with Wolves.
All right, so first of all, that's not a Western movie. Dances with Wolves.
Cowboys and Indians is like the most quintessential.
No, that's not a Western movie.
Wow, racist.
That's not racist. That's just not of that genre. Now, Dances with Wolves is just a beautiful drama, and it's a 10 out of 10. But to answer your question, no, not really. I don't like Western movies that much. But if I had to pick one, it's actually Grit. I absolutely loved... Yeah, True Grit.
The Coen Brothers one.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It is so beautiful. The acting is great. The writing is great. The direction is great. And then, because I'm ignorant to Western films, because it's really not my jam, I then realized, oh, there was a previous True Grit before this. I should watch that one. And it was amazing, too. So I think True Grit is my favorite one.
My grandma and grandpa made me watch the original True Grit with John Wayne when I was like a kid.
Yeah, I'm not a John Wayne person. I'm not a Clint Eastwood person. I find nothing in them.
The thing is, if you eliminate John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, then you've basically eliminated all the good movies in the Western genre.
Exactly, which is probably why I don't like most or any of them. True Grit had Matt Damon in it, and I was like, sign me up. You know, like I can look at him and stand him and understand this man. I'm down. By the way,
it's hard to pick a favorite Tarantino, but I think his Western with them all snowed in at the...
Oh, yeah.
What's that one called?
Oh, my God.
Shit.
Why are we having a brain fart? 8 something?
The Hateful Eight.
The Hateful Eight. I knew it.
Yeah.
Yes, The Hateful Eight is spectacular. I don't know if I would put that in the Western category, but
I know I see it in like the Rotten Tomatoes top 100 Westerns, and I go, oh, okay. Well, if that's a Western, I definitely.
Okay, well, if that's a Western, then that might be my number 1, and then True Grit is number 2.
Cool.
But yeah,
Django Unchained also doesn't count. If it has mostly Native Americans or black slaves, suddenly we're not in Western territory.
You know, I did like that movie, but not as much as the other ones.
Yeah,
I just
fair.
didn't. And you know, for fun, like a guilty pleasure, it has like Sharon Stone in it. It was so bad. It was like one of the worst westerns probably ever made. It was really cheesy. Can you Google it real quick? Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Now I do.
I was young, and so I thought it was cute, but then I watched it again in my elder years, and I thought to myself, oh boy, this is cringy and inaccurate.
The Quick and the Dead.
Oh my God. The Quick and the Dead is my favorite guilty pleasure in Western movie category.
You're not supposed to have guilty pleasure westerns.
Why not?
You're supposed to just own it.
No, I don't own it. I don't want to watch that movie ever again, but if anyone's looking for a good time, The Quick and the Dead. Okay, on another note, I wanted to give a really special shout out to our listeners in Sweden. We were looking at demographics, and it turns out that we have listeners in Sweden. So if you are listening from Sweden, say hello. Maybe drop me a DM. I'm at Ruth Vaca on Instagram. Very public. I'm not leaving social media anytime soon, so you can still find me there.
And you
but
can
I am
message
fascinated
me
by that.
in a written letter.
Yeah, with
Just
15 stamps.
Send it to Raino Vashelsky, or actually send it Bloomington, Indiana, care of Raino Vashelsky. It'll get to me.
Yeah, it'll get to you. Somebody will find you. They'll
Yeah.
be like, yeah. So I really wanted to give a special shout out to Sweden. I'm wondering who's listening there. Okay, so thank you, Sweden. And I wish I would have prepped for this to say thank you in Swedish. Talk about a fail. I should have prepped that. I don't know how to say thank you in Swedish, but thank you.
Dankeschön.
No, you're not even saying it right in German, by the way. It's not-
Danke Schoon.
Nope.
Volkswagen.
Dankeschön. Dankeschön.
Dankeschön. I'm glad I've never heard the German version of that Dankeschön song, because I think it would be terrible. Dankeschön, darling, Dankeschön.
Ich liebe dich. Oh, come on. German is fun. Anyway, mad respect to Sweden and this candy, the gummy bear situation there. I would literally go to Sweden just for the gummies.
And you were commenting after listening to the edit of the Collier interview that the audience is about to hear that he's really good because he is a natural podcaster. He
is just a professional conversationalist.
Right, professional conversation.
Which I consider myself to be a professional
Yeah.
conversationalist, not in all aspects. Like, I can't talk nerd with you all the time. Like, sometimes I'm like, hold on, I don't actually know what you're talking about. But for the most part, I think I can talk almost about anything with anybody.
So I was trying to tee up, and here's Collier, and you just made it about you. Nicely done.
It's like,
Maybe you will do well on social media. Stay right there.
I'm
where
always
you
going to take
belong.
it back to me, and you're always going to take it back to politics. That's just how this relationship works. I'm like, it's like I'm trying to be
Neither
seen.
of us are listening
No,
to each other.
I'm trying to be seen in my own relationship.
But
I'm
it
like,
seems like it
you want to
works.
see me tap dance? I can tap dance. And you're just like, all right, so did you know that Wyatt Earp? And it's like, oh my God, what about me?
We're all tap dancing now, baby. That's my political
Well,
commentary.
let's tap into this interview.
If you want to hear a couple pro conversationalists plus Ray having a great conversation, you're in for a treat. 'Cause
Honestly,
here-
I could talk to that man for like 3 hours.
and we'll definitely have him back to do 3 more hours of conversation.
Oh, for
sometime
sure.
in the future, right?
For sure. He's super fun. So make sure to
our friend, amazingly interesting Collier Landry. So yeah, dude, I know you're used to real film sets where it's all, rolling and action and stuff, but I kind of got used to the Barbara Kopple style of like, what are we rolling? Are you going to call it when we're rolling? Like, well, we've been
Right.
rolling for an hour already, you know?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's just the sneaky world of cinema verite. You know, it's interesting. It's interesting when you talk about Barbara's process. And, I often will, obviously, I do a podcast, right? And I have a YouTube channel. And when I'm interviewing with people, I'll start recording. Like, I started recording when we sat down. just so I have all the little banter and stuff. Because
Yep.
I just save that stuff for nuggets. I don't know why. You know what
yeah.
I mean? I'm like Barbara. I probably learned that from Barbara, right?
Totally.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting that I'm sure nobody knows and will know is that you and I worked very closely and had a lot of moments in the production of that film. And even after we shot it, where you and I were going through my father's letters together, remember, over the phone, and we were recording stuff over Zoom or however we were recording it. And it was a really interesting experience to sort of unravel the story after the story's been shot, if that makes sense, you know? And you were
Yeah.
going through archival footage, and so we really got to know one another quite a bit.
Well, okay, so that is my first question, is 27 years passed between your tragedy, between kind of your moment in the spotlight, maybe it was 26 in that case, but
Yeah.
it seemed to me that by the time, yes, this was a Barbara Kopple film, of course, and I'm precious about the role of producers, so it was also a David Cassidy and a Ray Novoselsky film to an extent, and the DPs and the editors. But I really felt like when John Morrissey brought us this project, it was very obvious that you had been baking this film, some version of it in your head for a long time. So can you talk about that a little, like how that came to you and when you decided that I'm going to tell my own story in a certain way and here's how it's going to go?
And therein lies, this is way more interesting than the film, by the way. So so I 1999, I was in a theater in Northridge, California, and it was like the Dollar Theater, whatever. And I had gone with a friend of mine from college. I went to Ohio University School of Music, go Bobcats in Athens, and a friend of mine lived out here, and he played on the football team. He was a black kid, and we were really good friends. And he's like, "Come on, visit in Cali," because I was like, I want to move to California. You know, I was figuring out my life at that time. I mean, I'm still figuring out my life to a certain extent, but I was. We went to go see a film called American History X, which is a very racially charged film. And it's about, for those of you that don't know, it's, first of all, it's one of my top 5 favorite films of American cinema in history. It's a very poignant film about the consequences of violence. Edward Norton is a neo-Nazi. He kills somebody. There's a very, very famous curb stomping scene. It's very gruesome, and he kills someone. He goes to prison, and then he experiences all the hate that he had been living while in prison, and gets out and then sees his younger brother going down the same road and really just tries to reform him. And it stars like Ethan Suplee, Beverly D'Angelo, Elliot Gould, Edward Furlong. Edward Norton plays obviously the main character. It's a fantastic film. And we both left that theater. And we, you know, here's a young white kid, here's a young black kid, right? And we're just both like, whoa. And he's like, I remember him saying to me, he goes, "It just makes no sense. See? Makes no sense." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Brendan, it makes no sense to me either." I said, "But you know what?" I said, "Whoever made that film, I want them to help me tell my story." And a couple of years later, I ended up moving to Los Angeles, and I was working as like a model, and I was an actor, and doing that whole thing. And again, you know, figuring out the LA lifestyle. And I ended up landing, and I was doing music stuff, and I ended up landing on wanting to really get into film, because I was very determined as a kid, after going through everything. I said, you know, I've got to do something good with this. Like, something good has to come out of this senseless act of violence. And I really wanted to tell that story, and I wanted to tell the story in a way that would make sense. You know, not only would make sense to me as far as you know, like complete, you know, kind of life is circadian, right? Kind of come full circle, like, okay, I've done this, but also to like share it, because I never had anybody when I was a kid, especially when I was going through what I was going through, who could say to me like, "Hey, you're going to make it. Don't worry. You're going to be okay. You're going to be safe. I know this feels like the end of the world, that everything is crumbling in, you know, the walls are closing in, and there's no hope because you've been abandoned by your family. You've lost the one person who supported you the most in your life, your mother. You have no father, you know, he's incarcerated, and he's a scumbag, you know, who's created all this issues. You've been abandoned by both sides of your family. You're in foster care, and nobody's really got your back, you know. I mean, Dave Messmore did, and he was my, you know, he was obviously the investigator who believed me when I, you know, nobody believed me except for one detective, as I always say. And together, Dave and I, end up solving that murder. I mean, obviously, Dave is the police officer, but, we worked in concert to bring justice for my mother. And so he was there, but I wasn't in foster care with him. I was in foster care with some, terrible family. And so I always was like, there, if I could have an opportunity to speak to like little Collier, right? Young Collier who's going through this, who feels hopeless and who feels like I'm not going to make it through, but I'm going to just figure it out and just be like, hey, bud, you're going to be okay. YouTube and those things don't exist, so you can't pull these up. There's no podcast you can listen to. There's maybe you read a book, but I never had that. And so I was like, I've got to do something with this to just sort of complete my journey. But I also have to make this for that kid that I was, right? That little boy who didn't think there was any hope, right? And so, I started becoming a filmmaker. So I'm like, I've got to learn how to make film because I don't think anybody's going to do it for me. And I've got to also, I've got to do something with this. And I remember it was January of 2007. And my girlfriend at the time comes into my little office and I was like editing some video or something. We had this like little small duplex in Hollywood. And she comes in, she goes, this movie producer is a photographer. He contacted me on MySpace. And he's doing some book and he wants to shoot me. And she starts like rattling off his films and she's like Booty Call and 1114 and Havoc and she says Kingdom Come and all this and I said, well, what else? And she goes, American History something, and I was like, American History X, and she's like, yeah, that's it. I was like, we need to meet this guy.
That's wild. You like manifested that.
Yeah, I guess so. So
that's not a coincidence.
and I ended up becoming really good friends with John. And a couple years had gone by and he's sort of like, I told him, I was like, look, I want to be a producer. And I have this story and everyone in my world, like kind of like knew the very ancillary details, the very basic ones. Collier's from Ohio. He's adopted. His dad killed his mom. And that's like all you need to know. Like they didn't know they may have known I testified. Like obviously, my girlfriend or somebody I was dating knew a little more, but the people around me didn't know very much about me. Other than that, not because I was ashamed of it. I mean, maybe in a way there was like probably some underlying shame, but it was more of I wanted to leave Ohio because it's Ohio. I wanted to be by the ocean and I wanted to be in sunny California, but I also wanted to be in a place where nobody, like the opposite of Cheers, where nobody knows your name, where nobody knows who I am, what my backstory is, and they're going to judge me on that because I was always judged on that. I was always treated that way. I was always like, oh, okay, here's the, it's the opposite.
It sounds like you didn't want to live your life defined by something that you didn't even do, right? It was
correct.
An experience, but you weren't going to be defined. Sorry, I have a cold. You weren't going to be defined by your father's crime.
That gets really aggravating because you're, it follows you around everywhere you go. And look, I'm much more comfortable with it now. Obviously, I'm very public about my story. I do interviews. We made the film and all that. But before that, it was like nothing. And, so this is like around, and I'll tell you, it was 2009. And John had come to me with some idea because I was like, look, I want to be a producer. And I was filming stuff and I was doing little shorts and I was, I wish I was on YouTube at that time, but I wasn't. But I was, doing little projects and somebody wanted to hire me for something. I go and, I filmed all these, I did weird gigs to make money, right? Weddings, bar mitzvahs, foot fetish videos, you name it, right? And so, but I want to get more cameras and more lights and figure it out, right? And I remember John came to me with this like really stupid idea. I was like, look, man, I've got something that I think would be really cool. I said, I want to do a docuseries, 8-part episodes and cover individual stories. This was right after like Super Size Me came out, so like it was the sort of DIY thing again with like Morgan Spurlock like being in front of the camera and all this. And I said I want to do a docuseries about the consequences of violence in America because American History X was so important to me as a kid and as a young man. And I said I really want I need to do something like this. And I said we could make this. And I said the best news is I own the rights to the pilot. And I gave him this book, which is still sitting on my shelf to my left right here. And it was this book of newspaper clippings, all from my father's trial, from before when my mother went missing, and that somebody gave me when I graduated high school. And I kept it, and I gave it to him, and he looks at it, and he's looking through it, and he sees like a photograph of me in the paper, and he's kind of like, oh yeah, this is your story. So he took it home, and the next day he calls me and he goes, holy shit, man, are you fucking kidding me? This is your story? This is you? Like, what the fuck? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, that's my story. He goes, I didn't know this. And I was like, well, John, like, not too many people do. Like, it's not like something I'm out there sharing, you know?
Right, yeah. And it's not like it's relatable. It's like, oh, your dad killed your mom too? That's so crazy.
But
Yeah,
my God,
I get it.
Ruth, when I would encounter somebody who had been through some shit, I'd be like, oh yeah. I'd be like, hey, come over here for a sec. Let me tolerate you real
Let's
quick.
bond over trauma.
Let's bond over some serious shit. I remember
Yeah.
I still have this friend to this day. He's a friend of mine. I met him. We were on the season finale of the first season of Extreme Makeover. We were both runway models, and he would invite me to his parties. He'd have all these people over, and somebody would mention some sort of tale of woe, or they would be talking about something. They'd be like, "Oh, ask the white boy over here what his story is," and they're like, what, like what blue-eyed quarterback over there? Like, come on, what's your story? He goes, oh no, you just wait. You Collier, tell him. Is it okay? Did I put you on the spot? Sorry. Is that okay? I'm like, oh, David. I'm like, why do you do this? Like, why do you drink wine and do this? Like, please. And then I would tell my story to somebody, and then they'd be like, wait. They'd be like, hold on, what? Where's the movie? Where's the? And I was like,
Right.
oh, I don't know. It's
Well,
one of those things.
so as Ruth would put it, you've been manifesting this thing, and then it happens, and we're out there in the field. And the way that the movie plays is more or less, I mean, I think we did this in 8 days.
Oh, but hold on. Let me
Oh, yeah,
actually
yeah, go
finish
ahead.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
So John reaches out to me and he says, this is your story. And I was like, yeah. I was like, this is my story. And he goes, I just finished doing a movie with a director. She's won 2 Academy Awards for documentaries, but she did this film with me called Havoc, which was her first scripted feature. He's like, but I bet you she would be interested in it. And I was like, what's her name? He goes, Barbara Kopple. And that's how the ball got rolling. And I found that email recently that he sent me from, like, we were outlining it. We were calling it Aftermath at that time. And we wanted to do different stories. So now fast forward to, I think I finally met Barbara in 2015 at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. There was an event, and she was screening she had just done a film about the 130 years of the magazine or newspaper, originally The Nation, for those of you that are familiar with that, and the intelligentsia of the world. The Nation, she had done a documentary about that, which was very well done and fascinating. And that's where I met her. And she goes, oh yeah, you have a very interesting story, Collier. John shared it with me. And she's like, I think I'd like to work with you. And so that was super cool. So,
I always say that the most memorable, on the edge of my seat moment in all of the many documentary shoots I've been on over the years was being inside your father's prison with your father and you, while you came in with the intent to confront him and finally get a confession, among other things, and get some closure for yourself. And Collier, I got to tell you, if I were in your shoes preparing for years for that, like, you would have seen my hand shaking in that scene.
When you're handing like the letter over.
Handing the letter, you would have absolutely, and I would have choked, I think. 50-50 chance I would have choked. I would have been kicking myself after that there were all these things I wanted to go over and I didn't nail him down on it. And you did not choke. And I wonder if you could bring our audience a bit blow by blow into how you prepared for that, what your intention was, and what your memory of that experience was.
So were you in the room right before he came in?
I believe I was, and then I listened from the next room over, taking careful notes.
So so let's go back to like when it started. So that morning, if you remember, and we had talked about it a little bit, I think the day before, and I think we went to film with him was December 22nd, I believe. So it was like night of the 21st. We talked a little bit about what we're going to do, but we were driving. We were going to go, driving at like 5:30 in the morning. You guys were picking me up, and I remember David saying to me, David Cassidy, the other producer, he says, "So here's what we're thinking. We're gonna go into the prison. We'll film a little bit of stuff with your dad's day in the life, and then we're gonna sit down with you, and then we'll do our interview with him." And I said, "No. That's not what we're gonna do, David. What we're gonna do is we're gonna drop the gear off. I'm gonna help you guys unload. I'm gonna take the van and go fuck off to a Starbucks for however many hours it takes you to film everything else that you want to film, and then I'm gonna come back." And then we're going to do that scene because I don't know how he's going to react. They could kick us out of the prison. Like we might not have anything. So I don't know if you remember that conversation now, but I was really adamant about like, you guys got to get everything you can, because if we get kicked out, which we were persona non grata, if you remember at the end of that hour.
I can't remember where I stood, so I can't claim I was on the right side of history on that. But I do remember a lot of discussion about the right flow of that day.
Yeah, we were talking about it, and we were, and I remember I was just sitting there. I was at a Panera because I couldn't find a Starbucks, and just sitting there for hours. And I was like, did you guys get this? Because I wanted. Because I didn't know if he would flip. I didn't know how he would behave. But when I came into that room before he comes in, and I remember I'm walking and you guys are filming the shot of me, and I'm like looking up the light panels. I'm like, oh yeah, there's my light panels hanging in the thing. Oh, they use my little adapters for the drop ceiling, And I was thinking to myself, and I said to Barbara and John Morrissey, they were sitting there, and I had proposed the question to them before because I gave them that letter. So before I even left Los Angeles, because I had taken on another project before we shot A Murder in Mansfield in Ohio, because I was like, well, I might as well get some work while I'm there. And I was trying to, over the years, I was going to make a scripted series about this, and I had given a writer who I had sort of had a falling out with, but I gave her all my father's letters to develop a script. And I was really nervous about contacting her because I didn't want to ever get the documentary. I had signed an agreement, so I was nervous about like life rights and everything. And then when that contract expired, I was good to go, but I was very nervous. And so I was like, and Barbara and I would talk over the phone. She'd be like, "How do you see this scene with your father unfolding?" Because this was after we got our permission. And I was like, I don't know. And then I was thinking about it. This was the night before I left LA, and I reached out to her and I said, "Hey, can I come grab those letters?" And she got back to me within like 20 minutes. I was like, "Yeah, come on by, meet the baby, blah, blah, blah." I was like, "Okay, great." And I looked for that letter because that letter, she had referenced to me a couple years before that. She said, "Do you remember writing this letter to your father where you asked him to like admit his guilt?" And I was like, "Sort of. I think I typed it up on my computer. I don't know." And she's like, "Yeah, it's a really powerful letter." So we actually used that envelope as like our hero letter in this little short film that we shot. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if art often imitates life, right? Mm-hmm. But what if life imitates art? Because the character of me in this little short film, it's him showing the letter and saying, "Why did you send this back to me?" Because my father in the film, spoiler alert, Murder in Mansfield, he had sent this, he opened this letter and then either read it or whatever and put it back in the envelope and wrote "refused" and sent it back to me. And so that's why I was confronting him on. So I remember that I got the letter and I told Barbara about this plan when we met in Ohio. I said, "This is my idea." I said, "But also I could come in and softball it and we could have a whole other different sort of dialogue here." But I was like, "Look," I was like, "Here's the letter. You and John read it." And this was, again, the night before. It was like December 21st, or maybe it was even the 20th. And I said, "You guys read this letter and you tell me what you think, and we'll figure it out in the moment," like on the fly. And so I came in that room from the Panera. We're getting ready to roll. My father, is off getting wired or whatever, and he's going to come back in. And I look at John and Barbara. I said, "So what are we doing, guys?" I said, Am I gonna bring the letter out? Am I gonna bring the big guns, or am I gonna softball it?" I think I actually said I'm gonna come out both barrels blazing, or are we gonna do the softball thing? And Barbara just has this like little sneaky little, like, how Barbara does that little, "Well, Collier," little thing that Barbara Kopple does, so which team she's on. And John looks at me and he goes, "Collier, I just sat with your father for an hour, 45 minutes, and had a discussion. And he asked me maybe one question about you. And he knows how close you and I are. He didn't ask about, like, what's he like in LA? What's his life like? What does he tell me? Just, man to man, like, father, son type thing. Like, what's it like? Like, what's he really like? What does he not tell me?" He didn't care. He goes, "Pull out both those guns." I was like,
wow.
"All right, here we are."
Make him care. Make him care right off the bat.
I was like, "There we are. That's our scene."
Well,
Okay, great.
As we would say, you were matching his energy.
I was like, "All right." I was like, that's it. And so that's what you see. And I teed up right there.
That's so
So all of
interesting.
that happened in the moment.
Can I ask you something? Do you think that your father had that maybe lack of interest or whatever it was towards you because you testified against him? Do you think that a part of him was like maybe petty or resentful of you for that? Do you think that a part of him was like he would never rat his dad out? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what do you think that was?
I mean, do you think do I think that's why he was maybe indifferent to me?
I mean, at that point when you were making the
No.
film and all of that.
No.
Do you think
My
that had
father
any
was
carry
my
on?
father was like that because my father is a psychopath.
Right. It was built
He's a
deeply into
narcissist.
him. It
Like,
was
he's a
no
malignant
outside.
narcissist. It does not the thought of someone's feelings or what they are going through does not occur to someone like that. And not to diagnose anyone, I say this on my podcast all the time. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a guy who's been through a lot of shit, right? But the truth is that these types of people, people are expendable to them. It's a transactional relationship.
Right.
So in that moment, I was serving him because my father had thought that I was going to make a film to help him get out of prison.
Because
That was
he's
in
a
his mind.
narcissist. That's
That's
what
in
the
his mind what
narcissist
was
would
going on.
think.
He would
Yeah.
even say to me, I think in letters, like, "Hey, when are you and John Morrissey going to make a film to help me get out of prison?"
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
like, "Oh, don't worry, Dad, we're going to do it." And so, and I never said, "This is what we're going to do," but I just said, "I'd love for you to be able to tell your side of the story. I'd love for you to be able to do that," because that was the truth. I really would.
Yeah,
I
for
really
sure.
wanted to hear his side of the story. Like,
Now, did you realize how old were you when you realized your father was, I guess, a sociopath, kind of narcissist personality? When did it really truly sink in for you that you even understood that? Because it's such a complex thing to understand as a child.
it never really sunk into me until after we made the film. It really never. It never really sunk into me until after he got up and left that room that day, because I was shaking at that point.
Yeah.
And I think I even said to well, Ray wasn't there. Ray was getting reamed out because of what I.
Yeah, because the prison
yeah,
folks thought we had double crossed them and that it was intentional.
Or that I had double crossed them. Like, that's what
Yeah.
they were, because I had,
Yeah.
no cap. I mean, I had pitched them because they said no to letting us get into the prison with the cameras. And I had, because the warden who I had a relationship with, Jason Bunting at the time, he had gotten fired by the time that David and Barbara and John got around to calling the prison. And so there was a new warden. They're like, "Absolutely not. We don't know who this guy is." And I mean, I had gotten my friends who were motorcycle stunt riders to go in there and film stuff and do this whole, like, crusaders coming in with, like, all the Bible and everything. Like, I had all these people going in there. So I had teed up this relationship, and then it was like, oh, great. Okay. So I had done this really, like, I always call it the best pitch meeting I'd ever done in my life. Is I sat and I on a Zoom, and I told them, I was like, "Look," because we had sent a bunch of, a couple of Barbara's films to them, the one about veteran suicide awareness and things like that. And I can't remember what the other one was, but the veterans dial 9 for whatever whatever it was called. You know, Ray, you worked on it. But they were just they wouldn't
Shelter.
budge.
It was called Shelter.
Shelter, yeah, Shelter. And we sent these films to them, and they were like okay, but they were like, what's your story? And I said, look, here's the thing, I'm going to give my father an opportunity to finally tell his side of the story, and think about how amazing it would be if he finally can tell the truth, and he says what really happened, and you have this beautiful, the prodigal son returns, father and son, there in the prison having this organic moment. Think about what a triumph this would be for the Ohio Department of Corrections to have that moment etched forever in the annals of film. What I didn't say is the likelihood that he's going to do that is next to zero. But I didn't say that part.
Yeah.
I just said I think that he's I said that there's the possibility exists, guys. The possibility exists. And they let us in. And then when they saw that possibility was not unfolding, they were yelling at Ray in a concrete room, and we could hear everything that woman was screaming.
Well, because the point that you argued in advance about the order things should go in obviously very much stood up after that moment, because we actually had saved B-roll of him in his prison cell for right afterwards, which we never got, which is why you don't see any shot of him actually being a prisoner in that film. Because
But you get the idea.
It was grab your bags and get the hell out.
It was grab your bags, and I'm looking at David Cassidy, and I'm like, do we got it? Like wink, 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 because something that you learn as a filmmaker, especially when you're a guerrilla filmmaker, and you don't have any money or permits, and you're filming. Like I remember I was doing this documentary, I think the summer before we shot A Murder in Mansfield, and it was this guy, and we were shooting on federal property. And he had claimed that we had the clearance to do that. They never got the permits to the clearance, but I didn't know that. I was the hired DP. I was not in charge of production. And I remember seeing the cops roll up, and the thing they teach you, or you just learn by trial by fire, is if you think they're coming and they're going to confiscate your cameras, or you're going to get in trouble, or they're going to, because some of the cops they'll ask you to watch the footage, and they'll make you delete the card to see if you rolled on it.
Yes.
Is you do a little sleight of hand trick, you swap cards, and you roll on that card just to show that you were rolling. So when they do ask you for that playback, you can play back a clip for them, and then they go, okay, we're going to delete that card, or we're going to confiscate that card. But the real card you've been filming on is magically in your pocket, and nobody knows the wiser. They can take the camera, they can take everything, but you got the footage. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
So I'm looking at, and I can't remember who our cinematographer was, because it wasn't, God, who
Gary Griffin.
It was Gary. It was Gary Griffin. We had, so I look over at Gary, and I'm like, we got it, like wink, wink, like you took the card and you put up your ass. Is that what you did? Or it's out the building? He's like, we got it. And I think then you said to me later, like, yeah, we got it taken care of. And I was like, yeah, we got it. I was like, okay, good. Like we got it. As long as we got it, I don't care. Because I was like, I'm going to end up another 5 minutes. I'm going to end up at a cell right next to I'm spending the night in this place.
I can't help but have some weird sadness or empathy for the psychopath or the person committing the crime. And when I was watching you, the both of you, I remember feeling just so equally bad for him, because I just thought to myself, like, man, when you're that messed up in the head, when you're that much of a narcissist or sociopath or whatever, no one can hardly believe that that's actually real. That, like, they don't see a consequence in the moment, that they don't care, that they just don't give a fuck. And, like, it's so weird, because you're like, they're doing it to their loved ones, to their wives, to their children. It's just so bizarre. And so one of my questions for you that I've always wanted to ask was, how did your dad, if you know at all, like, lure someone like your mom, who seemed so sweet and like a beautiful soul, into that relationship in the first place. Like they charm you
Sure.
to death,
Yeah.
they love bomb you or
Yeah.
impress you, or they promise you with escapism of your life and whatever it is,
Sure.
right? So, what was it about your dad that your mom, I guess, believed that he was even human, right? Because sometimes I feel like the tendencies, the personality of your father, I feel like the red flags are kind of obvious or should be obvious, but they also know how to mask and assimilate.
Sure. So I want to go back before I answer that question. I just want to not make a correction, but yeah, I guess sort of a correction.
Sure.
You said, how can you, like, how this person, you're watching my father and you say, how can you just not give a fuck? It's not that they don't give a fuck, Ruth. It's that it doesn't occur to them.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
the big difference.
Sure.
It's not like they are conscientiously going, I don't give a shit about Collier's feelings. I'm gonna gaslight him. I'm gonna bulldoze him. I'm not gonna give a shit. It's that it does not occur to them.
Right.
They don't think about it. It doesn't occur. It's not in their thought process. You know what I mean? It's like you remember that film, The Gods Must Be Crazy?
Yes. I
And the
I've
Coca-Cola
only seen
bottle
it once,
falls
but
from
yes.
the sky and it sets off the whole chain of events. And they're like, what is a Coca-Cola bottle? Like, it's just, they don't know. It's the same thing. It's like, wait, feelings? What is this? Feeling? It's the same thing. It's a foreign object to them. It'd be like if an alien came and landed on their lawn, they'd be like, what is that? It doesn't occur to them.
That's
They
such
don't
a
think.
great way of putting it.
And so that, I think, is the thing that a lot of people is very hard for them to reconcile, because we're like, but why don't they feel this way? Because they don't think like us. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing, you know? Now, to your point about my mother, like, look, I mean, she's not here so I can't ask her this. And I mean, she's not here and I can't ask her this, right? But my mother, I mean, she's here in spirit. I have a photo of us on my desk.
Aw,
That's a
But,
great one. I love
Yeah,
that
it's a
photo.
cool one, right? I like it.
Yeah.
But so I don't know. What I do know is my mother met my father when she was, I think, 17. My father was 19. So they met very young and they were together since then until her death, right? So that's 35 years? 37 years, something like that? Or wait, hold on. For the 27 years, sorry. She's going to roll over in her grave. I add years to her. They met so young. They fell in love, and my mother was hooked. You know what I mean? And I think that, again, look, I'm a really empathetic person. I was just talking about my podcast the other day about narcissism. I started talking about it a lot more. I was in a narcissistic relationship earlier this year. I was head over heels for this person, and it finally took me of just like, they just do not. It does not occur to them.
right.
Obviously they are not a psychopath. They're not anything near what my father was, but it's like, again, these, and I'm not diagnosing anyone either, but it became as somebody who's very empathetic to everyone and who I'm always trying to understand my partner's needs. You realize that but it didn't matter. I still had feelings for this person. I was in, or what I thought was in love. Maybe it was infatuation. I don't know. Or maybe it was just like, I'm going to prove to them that I'm worthy of love. So I'm going to make them feel this way. But they told me they love me, and then they treat me, then they're like repulsed by me, and then they love me again and they want to have a future. They do like future faking and things like that. Like you mentioned, right? Future faking, promise making. Oh, it'll be better this time. Oh, let's get back together. Oh, let's do this. You know what I mean? So it's very easy. And I'm somebody who, again, recognizes these patterns. I saw the red flags in that relationship. I was well aware of them. I thought in the first 2 dates, I was like, when she started criticizing me about certain things, I thought, I think this person, I don't know if I would say they're a narcissist, but they definitely have, there's red flags here that it's not going to end well. And of course I was right, but of course I didn't trust I was like, oh no, but I can change them, or I'll be the one to make it all better. Oh, I can do this. There's, we have a savior complex, and they reckon these people who have these, and again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a guy who's been through a lot of shit. But in my experience in talking with professionals and listening to professionals like Dr. Ramani Durvasula, who wrote the book It's Not You, and she's like the world expert on narcissism, is these people are very good at selecting their prey and finding people who are natural empaths, who will, become their like ride or die, and they can just do whatever they want with you. My mother, I ended up finding out while we were doing pre-production for the film. I was talking to my father's sister, and she told me a story about how my mother came. They were vacationing on I think it's called Tom's River in New Jersey, and they were vacationing, my father's family, and my mother showed up looking for my father, and they wouldn't tell her where he was because he was out with some woman, out with some girl, and my mother knew. So my mother knew he was a womanizer the whole time they were together. He was cheating on her when they were dating. So she knew, and she just decided to overlook it. And that's, again, that speaks to the nature of how these people are at their core. They're able to really convince you that you can't live without them, or that they'll change, or this. So she was roped in very well. Now, then you throw into the stew of that the fact that she, supported my father when he was in medical school. So she was invested in his future. And then she wanted a child. So she had a child, and she had this child, and she loved this child more than anything and wanted for this child's future as well. So she was full on invested in it, enough to tolerate and put up with the girlfriends, enough to tolerate and put up with his bullshit and his abuse and all of that, because she's like, but it'll work out someday. Someday I'll either have the fairy tale, or my son will be okay, and I'll have a nice life, and then I'll figure it all out from there. And that's, I think, what we do. And and there are many cautionary tales like that. Not every tale ends with someone losing their life in such a horrific way as my mother did, but people lose their lives.
For sure.
I have a friend who's a stalking advocate, and she said to me something. She has a stalker. This stalker has stalked many high-profile people like Kim Kardashian and Gwyneth Paltrow, and people, very famous people. And then my friend. And she said, stalking is murder in slow motion.
Ooh, that's
And
terrifying.
it's terrifying when you think about that, because these people who behave this way, they pick apart, they take pieces of your life from you. And just even myself, just being very introspective in this from my, past fling that I had over the summer with this person, I was like, I remember saying to them, and this was very recent when I said it to them. We had broken up, and then she wanted to get back together. And I said, look, here's the question that I had to ask myself. I found myself asking, is the sadness that I feel with you greater than the sadness that I feel without you? Now, if somebody said that to me, I'd probably go stick my head in the sand, and I'd be like, I can't believe I can't believe that I made someone feel in a way. I made someone feel
Right.
that they were sadder with me than without me. And her response was, well, that's a question only you can answer.
Oh. Yeah.
Just like,
Yeah.
and
It
you
was
have
very
proven,
simple for her.
you have proven my point.
Right.
And they just do not.
From my therapy, because I've dealt with some narcissistic personalities as well, it's that, and I've heard it before as well from professionals, it's like a sign that you were raised by a narcissist is that you're always trying to please difficult people.
Yeah.
Or like make them like you. And I'm like, ooh, when the first time I heard that, I was like, oh no. Like, I think that's so true.
Bingo.
I've had like really horrible, toxic friends and relationships where I'm like, why was I trying to make that person be good to me so bad when they had zero interest in doing that for me?
I would like to take a moment to point out to the audience that there is a happy ending to these stories, though, as she's sitting next to a wonderful human
Yeah.
that she has a child with.
Yes. It took a lot of therapy and a lot of Oprah aha self-work kind of situation. But yeah, I mean, it's still really difficult actually for me to accept that I'm in a healthy relationship, to be honest. I just mentioned something. Speaking of the stalking situation, did you watch that baby reindeer?
Yeah.
Did that like trigger the stalking friend and everything?
Well, I mean, the stalking friend is the one that told me about it, but I had already watched it when it started. But it reminded me of some other relationships that I was in. Yeah, and I've had stalkers. And my father, when I was a kid, and before my mother was killed, he took us on. We would go to these medical conventions in Clearwater Beach, Florida. And I remember on one trip we drove down from Clearwater Beach to like South Florida, someplace there. And my father said he was doing recon work for the Navy. And he was really taking photographs of, his ex fiance's apartment, stalking her. You know, and he
Whoa.
brought both my mother and I. He rented a convertible, and we're in the back seat, and he's yelling at us, "Get the fuck down! Get the fuck down!" I'm like, "Mommy, what's going on?" She's like, "Just be quiet. It'll be over soon." Daddy's taking surveillance photos for the neighborhood. He was really taking photographs of his ex-girlfriend. Like he drug his son
Wow.
and wife to drive 3 hours away to go take pictures of his ex-girlfriend.
Oof, that's rough. Have you ever heard from any of his exes
I
kind of
have.
saying like, so have they confirmed kind of like, I was really scared of your dad and it could have been
Yes.
me
Yes.
instead of your mom kind of thing?
I remember there was this girl from Chicago, ironically,
Mm-hmm.
who was on my YouTube. I don't know, like maybe about, let's say about 6 months ago. It was like maybe over the summer, and she wrote in. She goes, "Yeah, your father dated me for 6 months, and then I found out he was married." And she's like, "And I remember when I found out your mother was murdered. She's like, I'm really sorry, and I don't mean any disrespect to say this, but I realized that could have been me." And I was like, "Yep, could have."
Yeah. Why do you think he spared your life, Collier?
Well, I mean, the thing is that I didn't look up after I heard those noises,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because I knew that I would be, it's nothing to make the hole a little bigger. But, he was going to take me to Florida. Um, this was, 3 days before he was arrested. And this is when I called Dave Esmore and I said, "Look, he's going to take me to Florida. I'm not coming back." And I ended up finding out after we made the film and after I talked to people and I was talking to the judge, my father had a fixer in Florida. So I would not have come back from Florida. So I don't think he had intended to spare my life. I think he did in that moment.
Sure.
But I think that if I had looked up, I mean, I don't think, I know if I had looked up from that bed after I heard the murder happen and heard his footsteps coming down the hall and I could see his feet in the doorway with my peripheral vision, I knew if I had just turned and looked up that I wouldn't be here.
Right.
He could have just said she left with the kid in the middle of the night and, made the hole a little bit bigger, and that would have been it.
I wanted to ask you some questions about other cases that have been going on, just to kind of
Sure.
get your thought, which I'm sure you've talked about ad nauseum, with other people.
I, you
But
know, I try not to talk about too much true crime just because it's just like, it's crazy, but go ahead and shoot. Yeah,
is it too
absolutely.
close to home at
No,
this point?
no, I don't have an interest in it. I
Oh,
don't
okay,
like
that's
talking about,
interesting.
I really, I've gone back and forth on the podcast about talking about true crime and talking about cases. But then people just ask more and more and more and more. And I'm more interested in my life about talking about moving through these circumstances and coming out the other side and being okay. I'm all about like, let's talk about their behaviors of the perpetrators. Let's get yourself out of abusive situations, recognizing signs of abuse, things like that. I'm all
Mm-hmm.
about that. But as far as like, let's analyze like what they went through and all, but I'm happy to provide like a victim's quote survivor's perspective on that, but
Sure.
I've started shying away from it. It's just because there's so many creators that are out there. That's all they talk about, and they make a ton
Mm-hmm.
of money. And honestly, I wish that I made a ton of money, you know, but I don't necessarily always think that like talking about it is. I don't think it. I think it's one thing to add perspective to people's misery or what they're going through. Adding a really cool perspective to it is great.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing to just constantly talk about it and exploit it is quite another. But
Sure.
please
Sure.
go ahead and ask me. I have opinions
Well,
about everything, so you feel free.
well, to follow up with that about your own experience, I am wondering, as someone who it's hard for me to tell Ray certain things because he grew up with like zero trauma, which I think is really great. Like I'm very happy for him.
It's amazing. He's a normie, as they
I
say
mean,
in the
he's
rooms.
so normal. It's creepy. Like that to me is abnormal, right? I'm just like, no, but what
It's like,
is
wait,
wrong with you? And of course he has his own eccentricities and weird hangups and whatever.
sure, of course,
But so for example, for me, growing up the way that I did with like the not greatest paternal figures and
sure,
misogyny and all of that stuff, I never I was pretty convinced that I would never grow up to have a normal, healthy relationship. And so I basically just always told myself, I'm never going to get married and I'm never going to have kids. Because I then later realized it wasn't that I didn't want to, it's that I genuinely didn't believe that I would successfully be able to have any of those things. And so I guess my question for you is it seems like you obviously have not given up on love, you still date and all of that stuff. So
hmm
what have women told you or claimed were your like hang-ups that maybe you still haven't worked through fully in order to be in the like monogamous, if that's even your thing, like full-time committed marriage or relationship? Or like what is your ideal status in a relationship?
I mean, look, I've spent a lot of time. I mean, I'm an artist, so I'm really hard to. I think my biggest flaw is stability. I don't have a stable. My income is
Mm.
always up and down until
Mm-hmm.
it's not. You know what I mean? And for many years, I dated a lot of people that were maybe unavailable. I chose unavailable partners because I wasn't
Mm.
ready to have an available partner. I think
Right.
I'm now I'm firmly in my mid 40s, and I want to maybe have a reliable partner. But again, the income stability is the thing. And as I switched careers in 2022
Right.
of
Wow.
putting myself in front of the camera, doing YouTube, and and really got into YouTube in 2023 and started podcasting.
Sure.
And it's all a very new career, but it takes a long time to build. It's a lot of work, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, I was in a relationship earlier this year, and a couple actually, and it you you got to be in the relationship with yourself while you're building something. It takes a lot of work. So I think for me, it's always been the stability factor. The thing that I've been told about with partners is I am very trusting. I am very loyal. I'm also a monogamous person. Um, but I I can sometimes I'm a little bit of a Peter Pan. I'm
Mm.
really good and I'm a very good boyfriend and a very good communicator, but sometimes they feel that maybe I don't put myself first enough. I'll put them first because I'm always used to sacrificing, right? And I've had to sacrifice my whole life, you know what I mean? So I think that that's something that I'm always really struggling to work on, and I go to psychotherapy for and things of that nature to but I put, I don't put myself first, right? And
Yeah, I can
sometimes in a
totally
really
relate to that.
yeah, sometimes in a dynamic in a relationship, if you're really trying to work on something and you really feel like, oh, I have to put that other person before me, and I think it's a struggle to find balance when you go through trauma or you don't have the right figures in your life. You don't see that, and then you also don't believe that you'll ever find it, right? Or you stop
Right.
looking for it in a way of like, I gave up a long time ago about like, oh, I'm not gonna have a house on the hill and with two kids and this that because I chose a different life. I'm like, I'm gonna be an artist because that's what speaks to me. So whoever
Mm-hmm.
comes into my world just has to deal with that. You know what I mean? I think that's the thing is that I'm a dreamer, I'm an artist, and if this relationship that I was in recently, this woman owned a company and she's just like did not understand what I did, just thought it was like, what are you, an influencer? What are you? I was like, I'm a podcaster and I have a YouTube channel and I
She
make
didn't take you
content and I also work as a,
seriously.
and she did, but then she'd be like, well, but I don't understand what you do. And it's like, you don't have to understand it because you're not paying my bills. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what
Right.
I do. It doesn't, you know what I mean? Um,
Hmm.
and I think that's something that gets into, but again, there was other issues with her, as I mentioned before. So, and when you go through those things and you try to make those things work, square peg, round hole, it does wear on you a little bit. And when you're a creative person, you can kind of sort of be like, "Oh, man, I really wish this worked. I
Yeah.
really wish this. What could I have done differently? What should I have done differently? Et cetera, that type of thing. So it's a very complex and nuanced sort of thing. But
It's hard being an artist and wanting to be in the entertainment business. I mean, I think Ray and I have always had a common understanding that we were both artists in our own right.
mhm,
And I think as soon as we decided to get married and bring a child in, the issue of stability actually became an issue. It
oh
was like
yeah,
the first time we realized, like, oh shit, we actually have to be stable, like, or have some sort of stability in order to have like a healthy child.
and that's a very
Yeah,
responsible thing for you to do as a parent. You know what I mean?
sure. Yeah.
I haven't been willing to make that sacrifice, but I'll tell you what, there are many times that I'm like, I remember I had friends that got pregnant in high school. I'm like, God, they were so smart. I'm like, I know they sound like the dumbest thing they ever did. I'm like, they are in their 40s and they are child free. The kids get married. They don't have to worry about them. They are living their best life. And now they get to be a grandma and spoil or grandpa.
Right.
Like there was something to that.
Well, sometimes you can have it all, but just not at the same time. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like
Exactly.
at different places. Oh, and so one really quick question of a real true crime thing that I wanted to
Sure.
get your input on.
Absolutely.
Obviously, you know who Gypsy Rose is.
Hmm.
Um, and so my question to you is, oh, would you ever date someone like a Gypsy Rose who was like, I feel very bad about what I did, I take accountability, da da da, etc., etc.? Or do you look at people like Gypsy Rose and go, what the fuck are these guys thinking dating somebody like that? Like, she is capable of sending someone to murder them just like her mom. You know what I mean? Like, what kind of, do you put any judgment on people like that, or do you have any theories, or I don't know. I just want to get your opinion on that.
This is a loaded question because I know her producer of her show, and I know people connected to her. Look, no, I would not choose to date someone like that. I have dated someone who has had to take the life of a human being in self-defense when they were attacked, and it was made into a very successful podcast and a very successful television series. And I know, and I can say firsthand that although that decision was made in a survival moment, and it was her versus this person who attacked her and tried to take her life, who was hell-bent on taking her life.
Yes. And I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about. So I
It
know
was
the
hell-bent
story.
on taking her life. And this person every day has to live with the quote-unquote consequences of her actions.
Sure.
And she did nothing wrong. She defended herself because it was him or her. And this person was twice her size. And for her to be that brave because I don't know a lot of people that could actually, when the chips are down, can make that call.
Right. I agree.
Can really,
Yeah. It takes a lot to actually.
It takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, it
takes a lot of courage to say, I'm not going to, no, are you kidding me? No. There's a lot of people talk, really, and, to stab someone versus, it's one thing to you pick up a shotgun and you shoot somebody coming through the doorway of your house. It's a different story. But I think the people who are involved in those types of situations, I am skeptical of. I am skeptical of their accountability, their remorse. I'm a skeptic of it. But I don't envy them. I don't wish it upon them. And there are people who will find them, who will want to be in their life and want to, enjoy the spoils of whatever that life entails them. Right?
What do
Money,
you think?
fame.
What do you think attracts, like, for example, her now two exes, Ryan and whatever his other name is? What do you
Well,
think?
there was a guy she
attracts
was married to
people?
while she was in prison, right? And then there's
That's
another
Ryan,
ex.
I think. Yeah.
And
So the guy that she's pregnant with now, allegedly they like broke up.
And where
So
did you
I don't
find this
know.
out? Like on TMZ, probably, right? Because she's
It
like a
was-
celebrity or something.
No, yeah, I mean she's all over the place, and I'm a pop culture aficionado, so like
Sure.
I follow everything.
Sure.
But I'm also just very curious about the psychology of people, right? Like for me, it's more than like, ooh, this I'm getting like high off of like someone's crime. No, like I'm actually just genuinely interested in like the wavelength of someone who would want to be in a relationship with someone who murdered someone, even if it was a third degree. That's still murder. Well, Collier, why don't you tell us where people can find you and follow you at the moment?
Yeah, you guys can follow me. I am at Collier Landry on every platform: YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. I'm really not active on Twitter. I have a Facebook, but I'm most active on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. And you can find me there. My website is collierlandry.com. And you can check me out. And I have a podcast. It's called The Collier Landry Show. It was called Moving Past Murder. And I have a show coming out on December 15th. It's episode 8 of the first season of A Plan to Kill. And then I have a new podcast that I'm doing with Apple and Sony coming out early next spring.
Can you
about
tell
my
us
story.
what the name of that podcast is going to be?
It's tentatively called Me and Dave Against the World, but I think they're going to change that. But it's a very in-depth telling of how Dave Messmore and myself investigated the murder of my mother and put all the clues together to solve her murder and then the aftermath of that. But it'll be a really cool, well done project I'm doing with Orbit Media, and they've done the podcast The Burden and some other shows, and so it's going to be really well done.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations. That's
But check me out on YouTube. That's my main platform.
for sure. Yeah. Subscribe and follow. Everybody Has a Podcast is a production of True Stories. Visit truestories.us for more. follow me on Instagram at Ruth Vaca and at Veganish Vegetarian. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe and give us an awesome review. Everybody Has a Podcast is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. You know, you have to encourage people.
Copyright 2024 True Stories, Inc.